Efficacy of in-prison therapeutic communities as treatment for opioid addictions in prisoners. This study aims to explore the effectiveness of the in-prison therapeutic communities on preventing relapse in inmates suffering from opioid use disorder. Opioid use disorder is defined by the compulsive, prolonged self-administration of opioid substances that serve no legitimate medical purpose or are used in excess of a normal amount needed for any medical condition. Community-based therapeutic communities are a form of substance use disorder treatment that is effective within the general population. In-prison therapeutic communities are similar to traditional therapeutic communities, but there were some modifications made. In-prison therapeutic communities limit the role of peer mentors, the duration of treatment is much shorter, and it relies heavily on the 12-step program. We believe that participation in an ITC will prevent our test subject from relapsing post-release. To measure the success of the ITC, we employ a quasi-experimental approach with follow-up, or ABA design. This design calls for follow-up measurements post-intervention and allows for the monitoring of parolee drug use once they are no longer being treated in prison. To this end, the ABA experiment design will provide us with the information necessary to develop in-prison treatment programs that continue to be effective post-release. The data measured in our study comes from a weekly drug screen provided by our subject, Carl. This data is collected throughout his 24-week sentence and for 12 weeks after he is released. The follow-up portion of the ABA design means that our study will include a total of 36 weeks worth of data. For the purpose of this presentation, ITC refers to in-prison therapeutic communities and TC refers to community-based therapeutic communities. Two-thirds of state prisoners have a diagnosable substance abuse issue, and more than half of all prisoners will relapse within 1 month of being released. This relapse is usually accompanied by criminal activity, recidivism, and overdose. In order to find the most effective treatment for substance abuse within the prison population and its effects on recidivism, one must first look at what treatments are currently available to the general public. There are many different treatment options available for substance abuse within the general population to include non-drug outpatient programs, opioid maintenance treatment, and therapeutic communities. Due to the effectiveness of these categories of treatments, many prisons have implemented programs based on these types of treatments. As many studies have shown, prison-based programs do work in the short term. However, many prisoners relapse within a few years of release. And the same prisoners end up back in prison for other drug-related charges. There have been some prisons that went beyond simply treating prisoners while they were incarcerated. These prisons created programs that provide care and treatment post-release. These programs offer much-needed support to prisoners after they have been released. The aftercare helps offenders to reintegrate into their community. Not only can these programs help offenders to find stable living arrangements and employment, they can also help the offender create a positive social support system within their new community. We believe that using an ITC that provides post-release care will increase the probability that our test subject will remain abstinent from opioids for at least 1 month post-release. Due to the fact that more than half of all prisoners with substance use disorders relapse within 1 month of release, we feel that maintaining 1 full month of abstinence post-release is a success. We believe that ITC provides the prisoner with a healthy sense of community, which many prisoners have never had. We chose our treatment option based on the results of the Amity program. The Amity program was an ITC with follow-up care in a TC, and the recidivism rate for prisoners who participated in the ITC with the follow-on care was only 25%. This is compared to prisoners who did the ITC alone, who had a recidivism rate of 66%, and also prisoners who dropped out of the ITC with a recidivism rate of 64%, and the untreated control group with a recidivism rate of 67%. Opioid use disorder is defined by the compulsive, prolonged self-administration of opioid substances that serve no legitimate medical purpose or are used in excess of a normal amount needed for any medical condition. Carl is a 35-year-old male-identified prisoner. At the time of arrest, Carl tested positive for having opioids in his system and self-reports having used opioids for the last 5 years. Carl was prescribed oxycodone for a knee injury he incurred at work 5 years ago. He had been working as a yard foreman at a local lumber yard when he was struck by a forklift. He returned to work 9 months after being injured and was soon let go for showing up high to work. 14 months later, his fiancée kicked him out of their apartment for spending their savings on drugs. He has been homeless ever since. He started stealing as a way to pay off debts to his dealers and was arrested during one of his heists. Carl does not have any family and lost most of his friends when his fiancée broke off their engagement. Carl has one prior arrest. At 32 years old, he spent 6 months in jail for larceny, and he reported using opioids throughout this sentence. Carl has never received any substance abuse disorder treatment. Carl's participation in the ITC will increase the likelihood that he will remain abstinent from opioids for at least 1 month post-release. Baseline A will be determined by urine drug screening upon entry into the prison. Baseline B will be determined by the weekly drug screening during treatment and will continue for 12 weeks post-release. We will be using the quasi-experimental approach with follow-up, ABA. The quasi-experimental approach, AB, is used to see if a treatment reduces a problem. The AB approach has 4 steps. 1, specify the goals and outcome. 2, determine a baseline. 3, measure the problem during treatment. And 4, measure the problem after intervention. ABA adds 1 more step. ABA requires that the researchers follow up on the client after the intervention has been completed for a significant amount of time. ABA is used when trying a new intervention, when trying an intervention that might have negative long-term effects, or if you are generally worried about the safety of your client. In this particular study, the intervention being used is not a new intervention, and we do not anticipate any negative long-term effects. However, we are generally worried about our client. We know that people with opioid use disorder tend to relapse multiple times. We also know that people with opioid use disorder are likely to overdose. For these reasons, we feel a responsibility to our client to follow up at regular intervals. Again, our intervention is based on the Amityville program. Our program is the Azkaban program, which is a 50-bed ITC with post-release care. It consists of 3 treatment phases: the orientation phase, the primary treatment, and re-entry. The orientation phase consists of a 2-week phase that consists of an orientation. This is followed by the primary treatment, which will occur over the next 22 weeks of Carl's sentence. The program incorporates group work and individual therapy with a focus on taking responsibility for oneself, self-awareness, respect for authority, and self-esteem. This is followed by the re-entry phase, which is the 12 weeks that Carl will spend in a therapeutic community post-release. The independent variable is the treatment option. In this case, it is the ITC. The dependent variable is the opioid use. The dependent variable will be observed with the use of drug screening. The initial drug screen will be completed by the prisoner and will be monitored by the researcher. The follow-up drug screenings that take place in the prison setting will be accomplished by prison employees, and the drug screening post-release will be accomplished by the parole officer. For this research, the instrument being used for measurement will be a urinalysis drug screening. Using urinalysis, opioids can be detected in the urine for 2 to 8 days after use. As with all laboratory tests, urine drug tests can yield false positives and false negative results. Unlike most other laboratory results, however, results of urine drug tests can be accurate and still yield misleading information. For example, a test can yield a true negative, even though the test subject may still be using psychoactive substances. For example, the test subject may use a substance outside of the window of detection. The drug screening can also have a true positive if the test subject eats certain foods, such as poppy seeds. Azkaban Penitentiary has a 50-bed ITC with post-release care program already established. Carl was enrolled in this upon incarceration. The ITC is located outside of the main prison, and the post-release care is monitored by the ITC clinicians. The baseline A was determined by self-reporting of opioid use along with a drug screen. After the initial baseline was determined, weekly drug screenings were administered for the duration of Carl's sentence and for his 12 weeks post-release. This graph shows the results of all of Carl's drug screening. The horizontal axis shows the time in weeks, and the vertical axis shows the drug screening results. The key down here shows that on the vertical axis, a 1 equals a positive drug screen and a 2 equals a negative drug screen. So on this graph, you can see that on week 1, the baseline A was a positive drug screen. And then for the duration of the sentence, all of the drug screens were negative. Post-release, the first drug screen was negative, followed by 2 positive drug screens, followed by all negative drug screens. One challenge we encountered was ensuring that Carl continued to participate in the weekly drug screenings post-release. Carl was required by the court to participate in the first month of weekly post-release drug screenings. It was Carl's choice to continue in the follow-up screenings. Not only were the results from the 12-week follow-up screenings part of this study, the screenings were also used to ensure that Carl was safe. This study was focused on opioid use. When drug screening was performed, we were only documenting opioid use or abstinence. So there is a possibility that while Carl was abstinent from opioids, he may have been using other substances. The results were not consistent with our hypothesis. However, we still consider this intervention successful. Carl did test positive twice during post-release. However, he was able to remain abstinent from opioids after those first 2 failed drug screenings, and we would recommend this treatment to other prisoners who are suffering from opioid use disorder.